introduction, and very pleased to see everybody else such a beautiful afternoon. This is a wonder teeming age, very great and very glorious. Science and art take great strides. Improvements and discoveries are brought forth in such quick succession that yesterday's marvel is consigned to oblivion by today's more wonderful exploit, or rare invention, or work of surpassing interest. Now this passage, which was written by a young woman named Charlotte Montefiore, captures, I think, the sense of optimism and the belief in progress engendered by the great exhibition held in Hyde Park during the summer of 1851. A century and a half later, we have become accustomed to progress, especially in science and technology, so accustomed that most people no longer view it with unbridled enthusiasm, and some indeed with alarm. Moreover, so many aspects of the contemporary world fill us with a sense of pessimism, particularly on the political front, that we have difficulty appreciating just how unique and remarkable the great exhibition appeared to contemporaries. For many, it was a beacon of hope, following a decade or two marked by revolutions across much of Europe, by the Irish potato famine, while at home poverty was endemic and working class agitation was a constant threat. While it would be wrong to identify 1851 exhibition as the sole reason why there was profound change in national consciousness, it nonetheless is a significant factor in ushering in a feeling of optimism and self-confidence that historians often refer to as the High Victorian period. So profoundly unique was the exhibition that it captured many contemporaries had great difficulty engaging with it. For example, an independent minister claimed, "The character of this exhibition is altogether peculiar, not to say unique. We behold a new thing in the earth," which I took my title, and he pinched it from Jeremiah. Many struggled to find appropriate language in which to describe it. All attempt at description would be vain. It is beyond anything I had anticipated. A wonder of the world. For a long time, I was quite dazzled, wrote one visitor. And this visitor's sense of wonder, disorientation, and her difficulty in finding suitable language to describe the exhibition emphasize, in a sense, the vast hiatus between contemporary people's conventional experience and the extraordinary building that appeared so rapidly in Hyde Park and was filled with such an astonishing array of artifacts. Before examining some of the responses to the exhibition, I'm going to give you a Cook's tour of it. But just for the record, I should perhaps remind you that a certain Thomas Cook, who was a Baptist and had previously organised tours connected with the temperance movement, made a great deal of money bringing people from across the country to the great exhibition, packaging the travel to London, hotel accommodation and visit to the exhibition, and hence we have the Cook's tour. My Cook's tour starts with the building, and there are a number of very fine illustrations showing various parts of it going up. And that's the roof, which gives you an immense sort of sense of the size of the place. And also just, it's going to be important when we come to the architecture in just a moment, just the replication of the individual units, or the individual panes of glass are of the same, making up the roof. That's one of the more romantic pictures of it in Hyde Park, but nonetheless sort of captures the way it really sort of dominates the landscape and also the way it fits into the park. That's my favourite from the Illustrated London News, which appeared just before the opening, and you can see the silhouette of one of the trees, which was in the park originally, and which was and the building was actually built around it, and the crowd was beginning to accumulate by the entrance. That's a view down one of the main aisles, and there were one or two things of scientific interest. Of course, the lighthouse illuminated on the right here, and you can probably see a telescope a bit of the way down in the centre. But it gives you a sense of just how packed the place was, with artifacts of all different varieties. And there's one which brings out not only the tree, but also Osler's crystal fountain, which was one of the main sites which people went to see. Notice also that there are quite a number of statues dotted around the site. For the technically minded, the machinery hall is shown here, with remarkably few people in it. And just to remind us again just how much of modern technology was actually sort of stuffed into the exhibition. Probably the most commented on exhibit was a Koh-i-Noor diamond, said to be worth £2 million. The people here who know their physics will realise that it's very difficult to illuminate a diamond in a public arena so that people can actually see it sparkle, and they had immense difficulty with the mountings, but that's before it was mounted. As I mentioned, sculptures were everywhere. These were the most grotesque ones I could find, but probably not totally atypical. Some of the sculptures created an immense amount of furore, particularly the naked ladies, and there are quite a few people who objected to those. Typical of some of the manufacturers are these sort of examples of embroidery, and dozens and dozens of them, or again, knives, spoons, etc., etc. Again, I'm not sure whether I'd want any of those at home. They're pretty horrible, aren't they? And just to remind us as well that almost half of the exhibits were from abroad. And it was very much an exhibition of all nations. This is a particularly famous one, which was an ivory seat, which was presented to Queen Victoria by one of the Maharajas, and had private place in the Indian section. And just to convince you that it isn't, although it's quite serious, this is one of the most bizarre ones I could find. But nonetheless, even just picking out those few examples, I hope it's clear that this is just an immense exhibition. Nobody could cover even a small proportion of it by a single day's visit, and the kinds of objects differed immensely from if you like the latest sort of technological developments to very strange items like this one here. Now, to return to my earlier concern about how contemporaries related to the exhibition, my central aim in this talk is to show that, faced with experience out of the ordinary, contemporaries sought to relate the Crystal Palace, and more generally the whole exhibition, to existing themes which they could comprehend. And in my researches, I've been impressed by the ways in which commentators, both optimists and pessimists, repeatedly evoke traditional religious themes in discussing the exhibition. As we've already seen, the iron and plate glass Crystal Palace was the most prominent symbol of the exhibition itself. Its design was widely celebrated. For example, a Unitarian monthly declared it the wonder of the century, for size, for design, for rapidity of construction, and for effect, while a Congregationalist minister proclaimed it one of the most extraordinary specimens of modern ingenuity and skill, an eighth wonder of the world. Now, this wonder of the world was 1,848 foot long, 456 foot wide, and covered almost 750,000 square feet. That's immense. And as this plan readily indicates, is very much built on a crucible shape. And its sections were regularly being referred to in the press as its nave and its transept, of course terms taken from ecclesiastical architecture. Given its immense size, cruciform design, and its domination of the landscape, it was often likened to a church, a temple, a great temple, or even a cathedral. And Punch soon christened it the Temple of Peace. Island glass had, of course, been used previously in greenhouses, of course, including the Palm House at Kew, designed by Decimus Burton just a few years before, and also some railway stations. But it had not been used really for public buildings. And it should also be remembered, thinking about the architecture, that we're in the middle of the Gothic revival. And most public buildings utilised Gothic designs, including, of course, the Palace of Westminster, which was being rebuilt after a fire in 1834, and numerous churches, particularly those designed by Augustus Welby-Pugin, and this is St Chad's at Birmingham, which was completed just a couple of years before the Great Exhibition. Now, advocates of the Gothic, principally High Churchmen and Roman Catholics, found much to condemn in in Crystal Palace's design, because writers of this kind looked upon the medieval period as their model, and they argued that Gothic architecture was uniquely Christian and evoked piety among the population. Meeting in the Ecclesiological Society and using the society's bi-monthly journal, the Ecclesiologist, such writers were very critical of Paxton's design of the Crystal Palace. And in the articles in this periodical, they praised the exhibition for its functionality, and especially the vast space covered and the speed of construction. It took just 6 months to build. However, ecclesiologists were particularly critical of the Crystal Palace on aesthetic grounds. Quote, it is, they say, not architecture, it's engineering of the highest merit and excellence, but not architecture. Form is wholly wanting, and the idea of stability or solidity is wanting. Now, the ecclesiologist despised the notion of mass-produced parts, such as the glass panels that we've seen, the iron girdles. Permeating their criticism was the implied contrast between this most public statement of modern minimalist architecture and the medieval cathedral, in which each part was fashioned by pious and skilled workmen who worked in harmony to achieve an integrated plan of the whole building. And it often, of course, took several generations, not 6 months to build. In valuing medieval far above modern architecture, these ecclesiologists rejected the notion of progress maintained by the Great Exhibition's main proponents. And such pessimists were also convinced that, unlike the cathedrals which had stood for centuries, the Crystal Palace would soon collapse. But they're not the only book. By contrast, other religious writers were enchanted by the exhibition and connected it directly to the vision of the future life prophesied in the Bible. In chapter 21 of the book of Revelation, the heavenly city, to which those who gain salvation are destined, is described as a great city descended out of heaven from God, having the glory of God, and the light was like unto the stone most precious, even like unto jasper stone, clear as crystal. And the 18th verse continues, and the building of the wall of it was of jasper, and the city was pure gold, like unto clear glass. Now the texts here are become favourites for sermons. For example, in his Liverpool church, the vicar there, John Richard Connor, drew a direct connection between the exhibition and the heavenly city portrayed in Revelation. In the course of his sermon, he described the Crystal Palace as an emblem of the visible church, and he proceeded to inform his congregants that on entering the Crystal Palace, when he went to visit it, he recalled the city of gold, like unto clear glass, and her light was like unto a stone most precious, even like unto a jasper stone, clear as crystal. these biblical verses rang in his ears. Just as the building itself could be linked to verses from the book of Revelation, other aspects of the exhibition could also prompt comparison or contrast with other passages from the Bible. As the historian Timothy Larson has recently remarked, the Bible loomed uniquely large in Victorian culture, and it could often provide a matrix through which experience was understood. Now, the biblical verse most closely associated with the exhibition was the first verse of Psalm 24. It appears in many publications associated with the exhibition, and it was on the title page of the small one-volume catalogue, and on this frontispiece of the official descriptive and illustrative catalogue of the Great Exhibition. And it was Prince Albert who decided that this verse would get so much prominence, and you can see it right at the top. It's not the version which some will know from the King James Bible, but from the Book of Common Prayer. The earth is the Lord's, and all that therein is, the compass of the world, and they that dwell therein. And by giving such prominence to this verse from Psalm 24, a lot of religious writers saw this as giving religious legitimation to the exhibition. And they praised Albert for setting the exhibition within a religious context. And he did in quite a number of his speeches also refer particularly to this verse, but also made a very important point about the exhibition being divinely ordained. Among commentators on the Great Exhibition, another favourite text, although a far more problematic one, was the story of the Tower of Babel in the book of Genesis, chapter 11. The exhibition attracted people from all over the world, and thus, as at Babel, a cacophony of languages could be heard in the streets of London. And it's worthwhile just mentioning that we're very used to as a multicultural London, many people would have had very limited experience of people outside, people in their own neighbourhood. And even come to London, one would have seen very few people of different coloured skins, different complexions, etc., prior to the exhibition. And for one, and it brought a great influx of people from around the world, and a number of commentators mentioned just what changed, how London had changed, seeing people from different nationalities, wearing different costumes, having different skin colour, and most importantly, speaking different languages, which brings us back to Babel. However, this text from Genesis was subject to many different interpretations. For ultra-evangelicals, it had provided a dire warning of the fate that must follow the exhibition, fitting readily into their pessimistic notion of the world destined to decline rapidly into irreligion and barbarity until it's rescued by Christ's second coming. And there's a lot of literature in the middle of the 19th century which is predicting that Christ's second coming is going to come in the late 1860s. So much for predictions. But a lot of people saw the close connection, just sort of 17 years apart, between the exhibition and Christ's second coming as significant. And the relationship between the Tower of Babel and the exhibition was evinced in several works, including an anonymous tract which has the subtitle, which reveals it all, the results and tendencies of national exhibitions deduced from strict historical parallels. And the author of this tract argues that just like the gathering at Babel, the commissioners responsible for mounting the exhibition had sought to bring unity to the nations. And likewise it says, just as it says in the Bible that the people journeyed from the east to Babel, so most of the people coming to the Great Exhibition will be coming from the east to London, not east London, end of London, from other continents. And he saw all this as giving a prophetic meaning to the exhibition. And like many contemporaries, he viewed London as being the cesspit of immorality. in which at the exhibition, with the cacophony of languages spoken by visitors, would only deepen this sense of how immoral, how hideous London was. And in his opinion, London had now become the second Babel and was bound to suffer a similar fate. So he predicted that the exhibition would result in the nations not coming together, but then being scattered throughout the world, forsaking God, and great evil would ensue. So in other words, he saw the Great Exhibition fitting into this prophetic pattern, which would result in downfall. But by contrast, many more moderate evangelicals interpreted the same verse from Genesis very differently. And they recognized the power of the biblical narrative, but drew a contrast between events at Babel and the events in Hyde Park. The crucial point was that whereas at the dispersion of tongues at Babel, this had occurred during the reign of an ungodly despot. By contrast, what was happening in 1851 was a Protestant country with a Protestant queen, and you can see somewhat to the left there the Archbishop of Canterbury, who gave a blessing at the opening of the Great Exhibition in 1851, so it had been blessed by the climate. One of several writers to adopt this interpretation, emphasizing the difference between what happened at Tower of Babel and this Great Exhibition, was a Fellow of the Royal Society, Samuel Warren, a lawyer and writer on medical topics. And Warren followed Albert's lead in proclaiming that science, technology and commerce would encourage peace and bring people together from many different nations in a spirit of friendship and cooperation. Moreover, as an Anglican evangelical, Warren envisaged England as the flagship of Protestantism and the epicenter from which Christ's message of salvation would spread throughout the world. The conversion of the nations in London in the summer of 1851 was, for Warren and many other moderate evangelicals, a divinely ordained act, and it was significant harbinger of Christ's second coming. And also, this linked in with science and technology, because he saw the growth and development of science and technology leading to a better world, a world in which Christianity would reign supreme and which would bring Christ's kingdom to bear on earth. Now I want to just show you a very fascinating document. I'm not sure who actually produced this. It is published by one of the evangelical publishers. But you can see it contains writing in about 100 languages, and just to make clear, right at the top, at the centre here, all those texts relate to the text in the centre. God hath made of one blood all nations of men. And the idea very much of all the nations coming together was, as it were, interpreted very much through the story in Genesis. Although the exhibits displayed in the Crystal Palace constituted a diverse miscellany, 19 of the 30 classes were devoted to manufactures and a further 6 to machinery, including a particular section X, which was devoted to philosophical instruments. And this combined atmospheric recorder here I use as my example of the philosophical, in other words, the scientific instruments. The march of technology was very much in evidence. But by contrast, science was not directly visible, although very much implicit in many of the exhibits, most especially in Class X, the philosophical instruments. Like many other commentators, several of the religious periodicals were greatly impressed by the artifacts on display. Take the example of the Nonconformist, one of the main bastions of dissent. The exhibition was loved by the Nonconformist. It was a proclamation to every listening ear and heart that humanity moves forward, progress, and a guarantee that all the great truths it typified, the dignity of labour, peace, unity, and brotherhood of nations, and their mutual rivalry only where rivalry is a virtue, find actual course of fulfilment. Man will have recovered its long-lost inheritance. So on this view, progress was the key word to attach to the exhibition. And I'm going to return shortly to the issue of progress and its religious underpinning, but first I need to draw your attention to one way in which the religious commentators made sense of the exhibits, especially those in the class under machinery and manufactures. Now, the argument from design is something which probably many of you are familiar with for attributing religious meanings to physical objects. For example, signs of design can be seen in the structural plummets of the operation of the human eye. Such an intricate device of the human eye must be argued have a designer, a divine designer. And for such signs of providential design, the existence of a designer seemed to be readily inferred. And in much the same way, commentators on the exhibition often saw the exhibition as a whole, or the particular individual items within it, as signs of design, and the whole exhibition as celebrating the divine. 4 of the 30 classes of exhibits were devoted to raw materials, which were deemed necessary for our survival and for improving people's lives. The argument of design could readily apply to such substances, since God had provided these for the benefit of mankind. And here you have, just outside the entrance to the exhibition, a number of these examples, lumps of coal, granite, etc., etc. And these are very much taken as almost sort of symbolic of the materials which God has provided in order for humankind to survive. And most important, of course, the emphasis very much on coal as crucial for the industrial age. Now, the exhibits constituting the remaining 26 classes were of human design. I've given you a few examples of machinery, embroidery, sculptures, cutlery, crockery, etc., etc. And as the contributors to the various journals, like the Arts Journal Illustrated Catalogue and other publications, the exhibition contained the sum of human ingenuity and design. There's a rather interesting sort of paradox here, because the artisan is not on view in the exhibition, and yet through the artisan's work, the artisan is very much involved in the exhibition, and there were attempts made, most particularly by Albert himself, to make artisans feel that they owned the exhibition. Now there's a challenge here which is posed to religious writers who needed to demonstrate the importance of divine action in an exhibition outwardly dedicated to the products of human action. So how did they, as it were, Christianize the objects on display? I'm going to give you 2 examples, amongst many. The first comes from a sermon delivered not from here. The Vicar of St Mary the Strand, Joshua Frederick Denham. He was a Fellow of the Royal Society and had been Cambridge educated. And in this sermon, which he gives on the Great Exhibition, he very much emphasised the religious and moral aspects of the exhibition. And he particularly welcomed the exhibition for its emphasis on useful technologies that would improve people's lives and encourage peace. And he contrasted the emerging peaceful uses of technology with the previous focus on military technologies. He argued that improvements in the arts and sciences demonstrated the vast capabilities of the human mind, and he praised the immense progress that humankind had made in science and technology and manufacturing. And yet, he was clearly concerned that such progress should not inculcate a feeling of pride and vanity. So he goes on to argue that the works of God, the natural world, is infinitely superior to the most consummate productions of human skill. And likewise he says that the great diversity in the natural world is so much greater than the diversity between the different kinds of spoons or tables or things on display. So like a number of other religious commentators, that Denham was both asserting the importance of progress in science and technology, while simultaneously portraying the artisan's ability to design as far inferior to God's, the divine artificer. A rather different tack is adopted by Henry Howarth, who delivers a sermon at St George's Church, Hanover Square, shortly after the exhibition closed. And like Joshua Denham, he was very enthusiastic about the objects exhibited in the exhibition, and likewise welcomed progress as a means of improving people's lives. Wherever the eye turned, there were proofs of genius and manual skill, splendour and utility. Everything that man, the great artificer on earth, has invented for comfort and enjoyment, for use and adornment of life. And yet he goes on to insist that we should not see all these examples of human ingenuity as emanating simply from the artisan, because they came ultimately from God. The skilled worker he describes as only a subordinate artificer, carrying out God's will. Thus, when examples of ingeniously designed machinery or beautiful statues were viewed, he argued that we should recognize that God had endowed the craftsman with the ability to design and construct those artifacts. Now, I've introduced Denham and Howarth amongst the religious commentators in order to show both how the exhibition could be understood within the context of a very traditional design argument, but also by bringing out the difference between them to show that argument could go either of two different ways, indeed in several different ways. Finally, I want to turn to another aspect of the argument from design, but one that will connect with the important issue of progress, especially progress in science. But before doing so, it's worth perhaps noting that progress is a highly contested term by taking an example from a non-religious source. Here's a mechanical loom, and I'm sure there's enough of the history of it to appreciate the following point. Although most secular writers hailed the exhibition as a beacon of progress, political radicals saw progress very much as a double-edged sword. For although it often produced products at a far greater rate than manual workers could, nonetheless, who would benefit by the introduction of mechanical looms and things like this? The political radicals were divided, but many of them argued that it would be the manufacturer who would benefit from the introduction of such machinery. And it was highly questionable whether the working poor would see any benefit or would suffer further exploitation and degradation by introducing such machines. So in this case, I think it brings out the problematic relationship between science and technological progress on the one hand, and social progress on the other. And certainly as far as many political radicals were concerned, they did not go hand in hand. Now by contrast, quite a few of the religious groups that we're looking at, including Unitarians, Jews and Quakers, adopted a highly optimistic sense of progress that encompassed science and technology, as captured by my opening quotation from Charlotte Montefiore. Evangelicals are most interesting because they are very much divided. At one extreme, you have the ultra-evangelicals who emphasize salvation and the afterlife and warn against the snares of this world and very much question the value of the exhibition. And some, even high churchmen and Catholics, connected with, let's say, the ecclesiological society, as we see, were also highly critical of the exhibition. But nonetheless, there were a number of evangelicals, particularly Congregationists, who saw the exhibition in the most positive of terms. And they often portrayed it also within the context of an unfolding historical narrative. To give you one example, Thomas Binney was a Congregationalist minister at the Way House Chapel in London, and he wrote this work entitled The Royal Exchange and the Palace of Industry. And this was a work, as you can see at the bottom, published by the Religious Tract Society, and it was one of a series of works which they produced, which was directed very much at visitors to the exhibition. And a lot of these evangelical societies actually produce vast numbers of tracts for being given out. This is not a small tract, this is a small book. And in this book, Binney outlined what he saw as God's plan for human history. After the expulsion from Eden, he argues the first men were very much sort of pathetic creatures, naked and ignorant, he calls them, without teacher and without tools. And substantial history goes on, each generation improves, makes progress on the previous one, by employing what he calls discovery and invention, and labour and skill, and industry and genius. So we get this picture of cumulative development, cumulative improvement, leading, he says, to the marvellous contents of the last and greatest wonder of the world, the Great Exhibition. So of central importance to this view of progress in history was the God-given power of reason, which enabled men to develop science, technology and commerce, which were all viewed by Binney as aspects of God's providential plan. Thus, he says, writing about the exhibition, its extraordinary contents bear the impress of thought and purpose, design and contrivance, faculty and power. So for Binney, the exhibition was a prophetic event that would result in the nations coming together under a unifying banner of Christianity, thereby resulting in the elimination of atheism, heathenism and all other religions. And moreover, he looked forward to a better world in which science would be devout and literature pure. The universe would be explored with reverence and humility, discoveries announced without boasting, and improvements, inventions received with gratitude. Another Congregationalist, William Leese, explicitly associated the exhibition with Christ's second coming in a sermon he delivered at the Easter Congregationalist Chapel in Kennington a few days before the exhibition opened. And like Binney, he fully approved of science and expressed the hope that science, notwithstanding its rapid strides during the last half-century, would in future be amazingly accelerated. Yet for Leese, as for many other Congregationalists, the prospect of scientific advance was explicitly welcomed for religious reasons. It would, he asserted, result in the long prayed-for Sabbath, when Christ shall reign and man be free. Moreover, towards the end of his sermon, he articulated an optimistic view, associating the exhibition with the Messianic era. Brethren, I cannot help expressing the feeling that there is something in all this, more in all this than meets the eye, something of which neither the projectors of the exhibition, nor the exhibitors, nor the spectators are aware. But there are so many points of undesigned coincidence that a feeling of awe settles on my mind when I contemplate the Crystal Palace and the objects of its erection. And in contemplating the exhibition, Lise could almost hear the Archangel's voice ushering in Christ's return amidst a new universal order of righteousness. Now just a quick, for Binney, Lise, and others who adopted this view, the exhibition was part of God's preordained scheme for the human race, which continually augmented in scientific knowledge and extended its dominion throughout the natural world. The exhibition was an instantiation of the divine plan and played a crucial role, not just in human history, but in religious history. It was, Binney noted, a gathering that God had sanctified. And for these moderate evangelicals, I think are particularly fascinating, they viewed the exhibition as a significant moment with the nations coming together. Trade would be increased in almost all pro-free traders against protectionism. Prosperity would advance, science and technology would make rapid progress, and wars would no longer be fought. But their ideas on the apparently secular issues are all very much underpinned and influenced by their view that somehow progress was ultimately underpinned by the progress of the human race towards a religious goal, towards the divine end. Thank you very much.